بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين محمد بن عبد الله أفضل الصلاة والتسليم. Can you all hear me? Let me just lay out my notes like this, and I need to keep track of time. Finding the fitrah today is the topic of our conference today, but it needs a bit of clarification. What do we mean by finding the fitrah? Finding the fitrah assumes that we've lost it somehow, and which is one of the assumptions we're making about our current human condition. The crises, the mounting crises that we face around the world today, the environmental crisis, the political crises, the economic crisis, but more importantly, all these can be traced to a root cause. So we're not suggesting that there aren't all these crises, the extinction of species, extinction of languages, the environmental degradation, the economic collapse and exploitation based on riba, exploitation of human beings, inequalities, political crises, etc. But at root, there is a deep-seated problem or root cause that one can identify, and that is that the human civilization today, the human condition, is no longer anchored in a fitraic way of life. We've lost our moral compass, we've lost our existential compass. We're no longer stewards over the natural environment and the animals and the creatures and other beings, some of which we see in this world and some that belong to the unseen. We're no longer stewards of our own bodies and our own conditions. So I don't need to rehearse the mounting crises that we're living through, but the topic of today is meant to address a specific issue, which is how can we recover the deep meaning of the fitrah, and how can we use it as a framework in order to understand the crises we're going through today, and then unpack the meaning of the fitrah as a program of action and change in various domains of life. Many of us, when we think about the fitrah, we think of some quality or innate disposition we have. That is correct, but it's not enough, and it's not the only aspect of the fitrah. The Quran reminds us in several verses that when it uses the term fatara or its various forms, that the fitrah is much more expansive in its meaning. In the Quran, we read Fatirus samawati wal ard in reference to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He is the one that originated the heavens and the earth. Therefore, in one of its most profound meanings, fitrah or fatara means to cleave, to split, to rend asunder, to open up and originate something. And so the fitrah then means that upon which God has created things in general. Fatirus samawati wal ard means He cleaved, He created, He originated the heavens and the earth. And we know through many other verses in the Quran that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the heavens and the earth upon a certain order, a certain rhythm, a certain hisab, or a certain kind of measure. It's not random, it's not chaotic, it's subject to a very precise law, very precise pattern of meaning and order. And so when we carry over the meaning of fatara in its etymological understanding to human beings, it's no surprise then that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala refers to fitratullahi allati fatara an-nas alayha, the fitrah upon which He created us. In the Quranic verse in English it says, so direct your face towards the sincere religion, which is the natural disposition. Al-fitra, fitratullahi allati fatara an-nas alayha, la tabdila bi khalqillah. There is no change in the creation of Allah. What that means is, if we've lost our orientation towards the Qibla, we can't change the fitrah. We can't change our nature. And so losing our moral compass or losing our orientation towards the fitrah comes with grave consequences for the human condition. And that leads to all manner of disasters today that are proliferating at an exponential rate. So fitra, it means that upon which, or the nature upon which something is created, and that could be creation, the cosmos. It could also mean the human being. Why that is significant is because in the Islamic tradition, there is a certain understanding of the fitra of the human being, that it is an innate disposition we are born with, which means human beings possess a nature. In a lot of contemporary discussions in sociology departments, philosophy departments, they'd like to tell you that there's nothing in human nature that's innate. In fact, we come into this world and everything is socially constructed. Your identity is socially constructed. Your nature is socially constructed. Your dispositions. There's nothing intrinsic that you come into this world with. But our Islamic worldview, of course, is radically different. And so we need to find our way back to what is it that the Quran is telling us about human nature. And more importantly, for the topic of today, what does that mean for how we live economically, politically, for our discipline of psychology and therapy, for our field of education, our fields of politics, the domain of society, etc., etc. These are the real questions that we want to start asking, because whether you believe in a fitrah or not, if you believe in the fitrah, it has huge implications for everything else. If you don't believe in the fitrah, it also has huge implications for everything else. And the thesis that, or the assumption we're making here is that modern civilization has lost its compass, or has lost its understanding that the human being possesses a fitrah, a certain type of nature, and by denying it or ignoring it, you can't change it. The Quran tells us, it's very clear, لا تبديل لخلق الله. You can't change God's creation. But you can ignore it, you can cover it over, you can deny it, but it comes at grave consequences. So what does the Islamic tradition then tell us about the nature of this fitrah? I'm going to try to unpack it a little bit at length because it's extremely important. In some understandings of the fitrah, we are told that the human being is born with an innate disposition to believe in God, to do good, and in some traditions, to recognize beauty. So the fitrah is, according to some traditions, this innate disposition we have. We're born into this world with a natural orientation to believe in God, one God. Right? We're also naturally inclined towards recognizing the good, al-khair, or that which is, morally acceptable and good, at least in its most rudimentary, basic form. But the fitrah is also just more than that. Let's unpack what it means to come into this world with an innate disposition towards God. In some of the traditions, and in some of the tafsir on the verses of the fitrah, we are told that there are two great cosmic events in the Quran that are linked to the fitrah. The first is the Quranic verse, or the Quranic cosmic event, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that He takes from the loins of Adam all their descendants and makes them testify or witness, Alastu bi Rabbikum. Right? You're all familiar with this verse, no? It's the verse of the covenant, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in a time before time, or in the time before our birth, we are all brought forth and we are stood before the divine presence. And according to the commentators, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, He doesn't say to the whole crowd, Alastu bi Rabbikum. He addresses every single soul and says, Alastu bi Rabbikum. And we all testify Bala, individually. Right? Which means that before we come into this world, we already have an experience of witnessing the divine reality. We already come into this world with having witnessed the divine reality. The second major cosmic event is when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala teaches Adam al-asma' kullaha. Many scholars suggest that the fact that Adam is the only creature in the cosmos that was taught all the divine names, and that Adam, or the human being, is the only creature in the cosmos that can manifest the fullness of the divine names, means that we already come into this world, our soul, our spirit comes into this world, muntabi'atun, imprinted by the divine names already. You come with an imprint. You're already imprinted with something. You don't come as a tabula rasa, an empty slate, a blank slate. You come into this world with an imprint upon your soul of this event in which you witnessed in a time before time, or in a cosmic event beyond our time space. which carries the traces of the divine names. So, when we're born, it's not when we begin to exist, right? When you're born, it's not when you begin to exist. You don't even begin to exist when conception begins in the womb. When you're conceived in the womb, you've come on a long journey. And you've come having witnessed events. Some scholars speak of this primordial event as something we bring into this world as a primordial memory. Now, many of us later in life need to recall and remember this primordial memory, which is why the Quran is called a dhikr, which means a reminder. A reminder of what? You're reminded of something you already have an imprint of. Right? So you're reminded of that which you already, at some level, are predisposed to recognizing. The ulama point out to us very clearly that you don't come into this world with knowledge of God. You come into this world with a predisposition, an orientation rooted in an event that has happened. Right? It's not like I come into this world conscious with a body of knowledge about the divine and his divine names. No, it's more of a primordial memory, an innate form of knowledge, let's say, or disposition to recognizing the divine reality. And so if we were to summarize then, the primordial state upon which we were created and originated is one that bears within it a primordial memory of the witnessing of the divine reality and the divine names. And that imprint upon the soul disposes us towards recognizing the divine reality of God when we are taught this by our parents and school. Right? It's witnessing of this primordial event. It also means that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has also given us a predisposition towards that which is morally good and right. وَنَفْسٍ وَمَا سَوَّاهَا فَأَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا. Some of the commentaries on this verse suggest that it means that the soul is naturally, innately predisposed towards the good. You might say, oh, what about all the evil in the world? We'll get to that in a minute. But I'm talking about what you come into this world with. Now, what society does, what parents do to nourish this imprint, this predisposition is another matter. And that's what we want to try to unpack a little bit here. So, and I want to introduce a number of terms just to give this discourse of ours some conceptual richness and an ability to start talking about it in English language. We come into this world with a series of fitraic endowments. Let's use this term and see where we can go with it. A fund of primordial patterns of order and meaning that unfold throughout our life and that await or seek realization. The fitrah is like a seed. If you don't nourish it, it won't unfold. It's like a seed, like an acorn that wants to become an oak tree. If you don't nourish it, if you don't feed it, if you don't sustain it, if you don't support it, what happens to the fitrah? It becomes occluded, covered over, to a certain extent, distortion enters into the picture. So we can then speak of the fact that our fitraic endowment requires interventions by society, by parents, to keep it on the right path of development. This is where the imperative of good education comes in. Because education, or tarbiyah, and this is a very beautiful term, and the notion of tarbiyah, if education does not seize this fitrah and surround it with all the environmental, natural conditions it needs to flourish in a certain direction, it'll be distorted, right? And this is where we begin to come into the area of, well, what do we need to do? What are the conditions that allow this fitrah to flourish and to grow into that which it is meant to be? If at any point of this fitraic program that is developing within us, any one of the fitraic endowments or possibilities don't become realized, there's a hindering, a suppression, a thwarting of our fitraic development. One might call this the frustration of fitraic intent. I'm introducing this terminology just to give these ideas more currency. And this leads to all sorts of pathologies. Now, I'm not going to get into the psychology of all this, but suffice it to say that if our education, if parents, the environmental conditions at home, if the natural relationship between mother and child or the educational context does not lend itself to a nourishing environment that allows the fitrah to develop in a certain direction, then the fitraic intent or this fitraic possibility that wants to manifest and become realized becomes frustrated, and that leads to all sorts of developmental issues, pathologies, and later on to all sorts of different kind of diseases of the soul and crime, etc., etc. So, the fitrah is something that is more than just the disposition you come into this world with. We've spoken about that. We agree on that. Correct? Now, let's speak more about what I call fitraic ecology. Right? What are the conditions? What is the situation? What are the ecological, environmental, educational, family domains or environment or ecosystem that can sustain a fitrah developing, right? Because like a seed, if a seed is denied basic nutrients in the ground, it can't grow, right? So everything that grows from a potential seed to a tree requires a certain ecology, right? A certain set of conditions in the soil, a certain conditions of the sun, a certain conditions of nourishment and water, a certain conditions in the air, right? There's an ecology for everything. I'm using the term ecology from nature, but here we have to expand the meaning to include what are all the conditions necessary for this seed to grow. There are three domains for this fitraic ecology. There's the individual domain, the social domain, and the natural domain. Yeah, there are things we have to nurture and nourish at the individual level for our fitrah to develop. There are social conditions and institutions and relationships that we need in our community, in our society, in our schools for the fitrah to develop healthily. And natural, environmental, right? So let me give you an example of nature, because it's the most obvious one. We know, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created nature upon the fitrah, upon a certain kind of natural order and pattern and meaning, that is in tune with all His other creations, which are upon their own fitrah. When you go walk in nature, when you expose yourself to nature, or when you follow the rhythms of nature, what happens to you? You feel like you're being nourished, right? You're being healed, that you're growing, and somehow you're developing in a certain direction. That's positive. Well, we need similar conditions in the social domain, in our social life, in our individual life, right? Not all social institutions sustain the fitrah. Not all communal relationships sustain the fitrah. I'll give you an example from the domain of social life. The fitrah presupposes, and we just heard the beautiful recitation of the Quran, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created things in pairs, right? In Islamic cosmology, in Islamic traditional classic Islamic understanding, there is such a thing as masculine and feminine, mother and father. These dual principles are of equal value and importance for the sustenance of the child. The frustration of any of these components leads to developmental issues in the child. I don't want to rehearse all the psychological evidence we have on this. This is something we're going to postpone to a later conversation in the afternoon, right? But let me just focus on one. The child-mother relationship. When the child comes into this world, if there's a frustration or a negative sustenance of the child, it affects the development of the child. Right? So we need certain kind of mother-child relationship for the child to develop naturally and normally and flourish. Right? We would need a certain relationship with father. We need certain relationship with significant family and others. Right? So the social communal relationships within which the child grows up sustain the growth of the child in a healthy fitraic ecology. Right? So the fitrah is not just something that we carry within us as an innate disposition. It is something like that, but it's also something that requires external institutional support, certain communal relations, right, in order to allow it to come to full blossom. That's at the social domain. What kind of economic relationships do we need in society to sustain a fitraic, healthy relationship at the economic level? Certainly riba And capitalism does not do that. Capitalism seems to sustain the worst vices of the lower nafs. That's not fitraic. Therefore, our economic institutions, our social relations, our educational system all play a major role in this unfolding fitraic reality. At the individual level, what do you need to do? Not just in your ibadah, but in your relationship to yourself and the relationship between you and others in order to sustain this proper unfolding of the fitrah. There's a wide range of issues. Today's theme or today's topic or the various panels today will try to unpack what these aspects are of the fitrah or what finding the fitrah means in the economic domain, in the domain of relationships, in the domain of politics, or in the domain of the environment, inshallah. So I hope you enjoy those topics that are coming up ahead, inshallah, and you try to start thinking now of the fitrah as something that's just beyond an individual disposition, that requires a social and the entire cosmic context for it to actually come to full fruition, inshallah. Wallahu a'lam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.